if there's no conflict, then however valuable the lesson is, it's gonna look shit.
Hi there. Today we're talking to the filmmaker Jasper, who's a master storyteller. Over the past couple of years, Jasper has won multiple Grand Prix in film festivals like Cannes, Hamburg, Los Angeles, and many places in the Netherlands.
The thing standing in the way between you and telling a good story is your own negaphobia, which is your fear of negativity, your fear of the dark side. If I need to tell you a good story, then I need to be really vulnerable.
In today's episode, we'll dive deep into the single most important storytelling technique that is out there, the proven formula to tell unforgettable stories, and the number one tip to become a magnetic storyteller. Jasper, I'm so excited to have you here.
Philipp, I'm excited to be here.
When you talk about great stories, what separates, let's say, an average story from a great story?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think that has everything to do, again, with the struggle. So there are a couple of components in every story. There's obviously a protagonist. If you're telling a story about yourself, the protagonist is you, but it might be someone else. The protagonist needs to have a goal, which we can relate to, right? We need to be able to root for the protagonist. And then there's a whole lot of struggle standing in the way. And basically what differentiates a good story, a great story with a mediocre story is just how deep that struggle goes. So you'll hear storytelling experts talk about life or death having to be at stake, or like Blake Snyder, the famous storytelling author, he talks about a whiff of death. Right, so in the darkest moment of your story, you kind of want a whiff of death to be there, because the darkest moment in your story is, what they would call the dark night of the soul, which is a term from Carl Jung, the psychologist, which is basically a moment of transformation. That's where the transformation happens, and the transformation is able to happen because something dies, a part of your ego dies. Yeah, I get it. It's a little bit dramatic, but we're storytellers, so we get away with it. So a part of your ego has to die in order for you to transform, which makes sense, right? So you have to leave something behind to make place, make room for something new. And I think what separates a mediocre story from a great story is, how what's at stake in the story. And then obviously you need some basics to be some basics to be covered. So the story needs to be real, right? It needs to be realistic or truthful, I'd say. You can kind of use your imagination, but at the same time it needs to be rooted in reality. As I said, there needs to be a protagonist which we can root for. So you need to like your main character. They need to have a goal that's meaningful, because the goal is basically there's what the character wants and what the character needs, right? And what the character wants is what he actively, explicitly is looking for, and that we have to kind of root for him to or her to achieve that. But what the character needs is where the message of the story is, right? Where the lesson of the story. I noticed in your book you talk about like keeping a story bank, and there's two things that you need to have, like, and one of them is the message that, or the lesson that's learned, the moment and the lesson. I think you call it, right? Yeah. So what the character needs is the lesson, and that's obviously what we take away from a story. But if there's no conflict, then however valuable the lesson is, it's gonna look shit, basically, because it'll be like you're going through life, and if you're single or if you don't have a job, like at some point you decide, I need to find a partner, or I need to find a job, or I need to get in shape, and then you make a plan, you carry it out, and you succeed. Which is great if life happens like that. Like I wish that upon everyone. That's my life. Yeah, well, I mean, it's a bad story though, because if nothing gets in the way of that, then we don't get to learn anything from it. All we get to learn is, you did good. You know, like.
True. Yes, but one thing that I love is that you say, okay, we have to really go to the deepest moments of the soul. I don't know how you framed it.
The dark night of the soul.
The dark night of the soul. And I see myself that I tell a lot of stories, but thinking about it, it's still shallow stories. It's like go into a challenge, but it's not the darkest nights of my soul.
Yeah.
So how can I, and also to all the viewers, how can I spot those moments? To just go to the saddest moments in my life, or how do I find those deep moments?
Exactly. Well, it's a great question, and this is exactly the answer. So obviously the thing standing in the way between you and telling a good story is your own negaphobia, which is your fear of negativity, your fear of the dark side, which makes sense because, you know, you have a big audience on YouTube and, you know, my face is now on your YouTube channel. So that puts me in a vulnerable position, right? So if I need to tell you a good story right here and now, then I need to be really vulnerable. I need to visit, you know, parts of my life or parts of my psyche that are dark and shameful or maybe improper or evil, you know. Yeah. And this is the difficult thing about telling your own story, as opposed to telling someone else's story, which as filmmakers we usually do. But telling your own story, at least before you tell it, when it's only you trying to come across it, then I would highly advise anyone to look for your dark nights of the soul, the places. And what is a dark night of the soul is essentially when your self-doubt is at the maximum, right? So you'll find that any story starts, then something happens that gives you the idea that, you know, you need to pursue a goal that sort of primes the goal. And then at some point you take a decision to pursue that goal, an active decision, right? So a passive protagonist is a very unlikable protagonist. So you need to make an active decision in the story. But because you made that decision, that's exactly the decision later on in the story that you'll have the most doubt about. Now, you don't remember your life in that sense, but you do remember the moments when you had maximum doubts. So any example I give off the top of my head is going to sound melodramatic or cliche or superficial, because that's, you know, like there's explaining how storytelling works, and then there's actual storytelling, and they're two different things, of course. But the dark night of the soul will be moments when you think, I did everything wrong. I was stupid to come here. I was stupid to listen to that person. I was vain to think, hey, you know, let me try this or try this new thing, whatever. So, for instance, this right here, right now. Say I make a complete fool out of myself in this interview, and you're like, screw this, I'm going to air this anyway. And your big following, they all love it, and I look ridiculous, right? Then I'll be sad about it, you know. And I'll think to myself, I'll be in this sort of dark night of the soul moment, and I'll think like, oh, what was I? How foolish was I to say, hey, let's do this interview, to suggest let's talk about storytelling together on YouTube for your 100,000 viewers or something like that. And you know, so if I look back on that moment will be like the flag, the signal for a story being around it, because then you get to think about, you know, what did I learn from this, and what was I actually after, and why did I decide to do what I decided to do, and what did I want versus what did I need in that moment. And when you start asking those questions, then you can piece together the story. But it always starts with the story signal, the story beacon. Maybe we should call it the story beacon, which is the dark night of the soul.
Got it. What it reminds me of is a little bit the mindset of stand-up comedians. If we take the average person, something bad happens, and they're like, fuck, right, this was bad, I'm very sad about this. The stand-up comedian thinks, oh wow, incredible, this will be my next routine that I share on stage. And so it's a little bit this mindset, right? When you talk about the dark night of the soul, is any challenge that you go through, any struggle, well, that's your story. Like, if you, the more struggles you have actually in life, the more likely you will succeed as a storyteller.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's almost masochistic in a way, right? So if you tell your own stories, then you need to, get sort of excited about how miserable you feel in that moment. Yeah, it's dark, I know, but so okay, let me make it a little brighter. I mean, you don't have to be a stand-up comedian in order to be a storyteller, right? You don't have to completely talk yourself down in that sense. When you're looking for stories from your own life, you're just by yourself, right? So if you can just sort of get into the zone where it's okay to revisit the most miserable, most traumatic, most confronting moments, and not be afraid to confront yourself, knowing that there's a reason why you're confronting yourself with these dark things. It's actually quite, therapeutic potentially, right? Because you get to sort of relive a certain moment and analyze it, and analyze it in a way that is very useful, because you first of all you pinpoint when you were doubting yourself the most and felt miserable. Then you analyze why. What specifically do you doubt? Which regret specifically did you have at that moment? Obviously, some decision is at the core of that. Why did you make that decision? Which was your want, your end goal? And then how eventually did this whole thing change me? Which is what you needed, which is the kind of the life lesson that's in there.
True.
If you tell a story specifically for a purpose, say you're giving a speech, or you have to bring across an idea with your story, then you tend to start with that idea, right? And try to find a story with that. The big, I'd say, pitfall in that is that you that you brush over the dark night of the soul element too quickly. Because you're like, well, this thing happened and it kind of relates to this message that I want to say, so it works. But then it's not really a story, it's more like an anecdote, right? It just all worked out, And as I said just now, like, if there's no deep valley to go through, then the story's just superficial, and it's just like, it's basically bragging, right? I think it's one of the best sort of storytelling tips is, if it's bragging, it's not storytelling. Because bragging is the story minus the conflict, right? Everything was fine. That. Minus the dark night of the soul, actually, because that's another thing. Conflict is easy, right? It can rain, the train can be late, there's a traffic jam, there's some internet or electricity, there was a power outing, just like in Spain. That's all conflict, but it doesn't suppose a dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul is the result of a stacking of problems, and it's only a real dark night of the soul if you doubt yourself, if you feel insecure, uneasy, and out of your way. You've ended in the upside down world, like in Stranger Things.
Got it. That reminds me a bit of a conversation I had yesterday. Yesterday, I was giving Dan Martell, the pretty famous YouTuber, feedback on his keynote. And I told him, hey, Dan, your childhood, your teenage years, they're so inspiring, right? He was back then a drug addict, getting in a lot of crimes. And in the keynote, he wasn't talking about it. And I asked him, dude, why not, right? This is the part that matters. And he said, well, it's emotional and I don't want to go in there again. And I told him, dude, you're being selfish. If you don't share that stuff, how are you going to inspire others? Sure, you can have an incredible keynote, but if you really want to inspire people, if you want them to remember your keynote, your ideas for years to come, you got to build that emotional connection. And it's only by sharing this vulnerable side.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes we just see it like, I don't want to go there. But by going there, you can actually help so many other people. And so almost think like, hey, you can do service to others.
Yeah. Yeah. And also I think, because it's very true what you say, it touches on the whole, the reason of being for stories, right? Is to sort of learn and live vicariously and enrich lives of other people. And they only learn if there's some thing that has been overcome, right? If there was a change, that's what the lesson is.
True.
At the same time, I do also understand how, it's not comfortable to dip into the dark side, right? And to get all emotional, and these are real feelings, right? So at the same time, I find that it helps to sort of take yourself out of your own experience, in the sense that you are the observing storyteller, analyzing the story. Because when you do, then you start to also think about, okay, so which decision did I make? What was my want? What was my need? Which transformation did that allow me? Who came to my help? Which were the levels of conflict? And if you break it down like that, it becomes easier to talk about. And that's why I think this sort of, maybe we should coin a term for it, like a holding safe storytelling space for yourself, right? Like just doing this work. And that's why I really like your idea, or the bigger idea of like keeping track of a story bank. But I would like to add to that you should treat it as a sort of self-therapy session, where you're really allowed to go into the deep moments of it, to analyze it, because that allows you to take some distance from it, which also makes it easier to talk about it in front of an audience. Because if you don't, then if you just go to the drama for the sake of the drama, then what you'll end up doing is you'll end up making yourself really sad.
True.
And I won't guarantee, but I have to warn you that probably in doing this exercise of going through your dark nights of the soul, you'll probably get emotional. I know I have. It's a difficult thing. But it's a very valuable thing if you want to become a better storyteller.
Beautiful. We're sharing a story. We go deep into the dark night of the soul. If we could think of what is a specific technique, how I can make that story more interesting when I'm telling that. So I know, hey, the story has to be a good one. It has to go deep. But then say I'm telling a story. What's one technique that will juice that story up?
Well, there's a couple, of course, like little hacks, I guess. I think you mentioned in your videos a whole bunch of them, like anchoring a story in a place, in a time and place, right? So you get your imagination flowing. Another thing is to create some kind of a question, or implicit or explicit question in the beginning, to create a hook, right? So that you want to listen to the rest of the story to see how it ends. Another thing is really lean into turning points. So, but, therefore, right? Like contrast. And this was happening, but, and therefore, but. That's the guys from South Park came up with that little trick.
On this one, just to clarify, why is often storytelling so boring? Because people are and, right?
Yeah, and then it becomes a sort of a logical deduction of facts leading to a conclusion, or statements leading to a conclusion. That's not how you want it. You want things to turn, of course.
Yeah.
I'd say, well, be aware of and lose your negaphobia, right? So don't be afraid of the dark side. That's really if I can have one message, that would be it. Don't be afraid of the dark side.
First time I hear negaphobia.
Negaphobia, yeah, it's a good word. Yeah, I use it a lot. Another thing I really liked, which I steal from Robert McKee, famous storytelling guru, is figure out what kind of storyteller you are. Are you a comedy or a drama storyteller? Which, interestingly, are the same. Two sides of the same coin, right? The only difference between comedy and tragedy is pain is funny in comedy, whereas in tragedy, pain hurts. Now, to decide what type of storyteller you are, there's a simple question: is if you believe in the good of people, no matter how much shit happens to them, how bad life becomes, and how tragic life becomes, people are at their core still good, then you're a tragedy writer, which is kind of counterintuitive. If you're an optimist, then you are more prone to telling tragedy, drama stories. If you are, on the other hand, see life as people are kind of evil at the core, they're kind of disappointing, and you see life as no matter how good the things that happen to people are, they will still be bad or make mistakes, or you have this kind of cynical look on life, then you're probably a good comedy storyteller.
What are you?
I'm definitely a drama storyteller. I love this. From the bottom of my heart, I believe people are good. And there's no other reason to live than to just believe that, for me. And I think people overcome no matter what. People are resilient and they bend in different ways, and they will fight and come out stronger. That's my core view on life. Yeah. The tragedy it is for me, yeah.
I feel that I'm a drama storyteller as well. But I was wondering, do you have any tips on how to be a drama storyteller but still have some elements of humor in your story? Because I noticed that oftentimes this is pretty challenging for me. For me, it's very easy to make people cry, but to make them laugh, I sometimes find it much more difficult. Do you have any thoughts on how we can add humor?
Well, you were asking the wrong guy. We just established I'm a drama storyteller. No, but I think it's not black and white, right? So laughing and crying in the same story is the best thing you can possibly achieve. So I think it's the power of contrast, right? That's kind of an abstract statement to make, but there's so much power into looking for contrasts. I think one of your videos, you had a example of some Hollywood person telling a story that was full of contrast. The female actress about
Emily Blunt.
Emily Blunt, yes. She's talking about this strange situation where she's on a
golf cart that looks like a wolf bear.
Animal. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this idea of contrast is just a great exercise, right? It's not like I can't tell you right now this is the type of contrast that you need to make, but I can tell you need to train your brain into thinking whenever you're sort of creative, you're creatively flowing, right? You're trying to come up with ideas. Then at some point you always need to ask yourself, what's the opposite of this? Right? What's the opposite that can help? It's just the one of the best creative tricks or brainstorm tricks that I've ever heard. Just persistently ask yourself, so what's the opposite of this? Even though it might not make sense, there's always the chance of there being a little treasure nugget in there.
So interesting. Yeah. Comedy really seems to, if you look at a stand-up comedian, it's 100% that's contrast. So what you say right now makes so much sense. That's why oftentimes they use so many of these lists where they're like, okay, this is a table, this is a microphone, and this is my dreams that are completely empty.
Yeah.
And so it's this contrast, right? You take average moments and then something is different.
Yeah.
And so in comedy, it's like, hey, how can I send people in one direction, but then break that completely?
Yeah. And what I always find interesting, if you listen to comedy shows, then it's unbelievable the amount of life's misery that these people talk about, right? They talk about their own shortcomings a lot, of course. Just the way they look, or the way they their character, right? And then most of their jokes are about situations that are just really painful. And I think, I don't know if you know this show Kill Tony with it's a little bit of a controversial show, but it's like it's like a talent show basically, where the guy, the host Tony, he draws a number from a bowl, and then one like budding, starting out comedian comes up on the stage and gets to do a minute.
Yeah.
And then there's a table of judges, and they ruthlessly sort of roast the person. And what I find interesting about it is that, you know, you'll see comedians up there who are not good. And what they're left with is just a really sad story. Like, it's just painful, right? And I mean, I find it actually a little bit too painful to watch because I'm a sensitive guy. You know, I'm very empathetic. I don't like watching it, but I do find it interesting because that's kind of the core of this type of storytelling, right? If you strip away the funny bits, then all of a sudden it's like a really serious story. Like it's not like, but it would be a good story. Because it's just the context is strange, right? Because it's supposed to be comedy and then it's drama all of a sudden. It doesn't. Then it becomes awkward. But it just goes to show how small actually the difference is between the two.
Very close.
Yeah.
That just reminded me of, I don't know who said it recently, but he said, if you want to be the most successful person possible, try to fail every single day. And so if we take that as well for storytelling, if you want to be an incredible storyteller, well, just tell yourself every single day, hey, today there's one thing where I'm going to fail. If you fail every day, you'll have the most incredible stories that are out there.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it works like that, though. The thing is, well, I'd say be bold in your decision making. Because if you take big decisions, that means, any big decision is always potentially the way into a story, right? It's the start of the second act. So if you take big, bold decisions, you're bound to make the wrong decision every once in a while, right? And that's where you start a story. Because anytime the wrong decision might in the end not even be a wrong decision, but it's basically any story is two big decisions, one that gets you into trouble and one that gets you out of trouble. So if you take big decisions that might get you into trouble, well, you're going to live through some stories probably. Okay. But I don't know if that's good life advice though, because like the whole point of stories being to warn you to not take some decisions, right? Because this is what happens.
True.
But yeah, if you're a storyteller or if you, especially if you're like a comedian and you have to come up with a whole, 60 minutes worth of good stories every year or every year or two, then you need to have some stuff happen to you.
True. Jasper, you've mastered the art of storytelling.
Thanks.
If someone were to start off right now, hey, they're starting from zero and they want to become a good storyteller, what should they do? If they could think of, hey, daily exercises, they could start to become a great storyteller.
Yeah, well, so storytelling is a craft, not an art, right? So it's something that you get better at the more you do it. I think that's one thing to realize. So it's like that book, that Malcolm Gladwell book, right? You need to put in your hours. What is it, 10,000 hours? Yeah. So that's one thing. Then, of course, you need to kind of know what the elements of a story are, and there's plenty of stuff out there to read or watch. I do really like Blake Snyder's book, Save the Cat, which is a little book, but I think it's the most accessible, easy kind of way into how to tell stories, how filmmakers look at telling stories. It's important to not be afraid of the dark side, not be negaphobic. I think it's an awesome idea that you write about in your book to have a story bank, just to, and those sort of key elements from a story. And I would add to that, like, what's the worst moment, right? What was the the lowest low, so to speak, the dark night of the soul. And then just sort of, write it out. Because I feel, at least in filmmaking, and I assume it's the same. Well, for comedians, it's definitely the same, but for any type of storytelling, it's the same. It's an iterative process. So, you'll find that the first story you write down just feels cliche and kind of. I mean, it's like the first edit version of a film that you made. You spent months rewriting the script, and then you spent shooting it, rehearsing it first with the actors, then you shoot it, and you're all excited, and then the first edit you make, and you're like, oh, this is terrible, terrible. And then you want to die, basically. You want to just give it up. And you think, what was I even thinking? We already spent all this time and money, and everybody got involved, and it doesn't work. It's normal. So write, rewrite, and keep repeating that, because it gets better. Just because at the end of the day, telling a story really beautifully and elegantly is also about telling the bare minimum, right? They say in filmmaking, they say about a scene, you should always arrive late and leave early, right? So this is the classic example, is that nobody ever says goodbye on the telephone in a film. Have you noticed?
No.
Like nobody ever there's no scenes in movies where people are on the phone. They actually, all right, talk to you later, bye. Because it's unnecessary.
True.
Right? We know that that's going to happen. So no editor ever cuts that into the film, leaves that into the film. Arrive late and leave early. That's the game. I don't know.
I love that one, because what I see in my workshops, the single biggest mistake that people do is that they give too much context.
Yeah.
For 2 minutes, they're like, oh yeah, this is what my company does, this is what I do, blah, blah, blah. Just completely unnecessary. Yeah. You can start most stories just saying, hey, 2 weeks ago, my client called me and said, Jasper, what the hell was that?
Yeah.
Boom, you're into the story.
Yeah.
Most people give way too much context. So what I often get, the tip that I give in my workshops is just cut all the context. Like bare minimum, what you said right now, arrive late as possible.
Yeah, leave early, yeah. And this, you need to give yourself a break, right? So the best way to do this is by iterations, and just sort of letting it go for a moment, and then coming back to it, and think like, well, and that's kind of nice about film editing, because it's very like, it's easier even than with writing, because there's just the clips in your timeline, and if we cut this, then nothing happens. It still works, and actually becomes better.
What are some other bigger mistakes that people do when telling stories that our listeners should be aware of when they tell stories? Don't do that.
Yeah, so, well, there's a couple, of course. I think I often talk about like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, or what is it? the four big mistakes. One of them is obviously bragging, which is the mistake of negaphobia, right? If you're afraid of negativity and failure and insecurity and the ugly side of life, then you're going to be bragging. That's a crucial mistake. It's a deadly mistake. The other one is kind of only focusing on the message, which is, thinking the story is the message, or the message is the story, sorry.
What do you mean by that?
So if you have something specific that you want to say, because say you're giving a presentation, for instance, or if you're making a corporate film about something that your company did, or some strategy or whatever, then oftentimes people will just sort of deductively say what they have to say about that, and that's when you get into and then this sort of deductive sum of bullet points, basically leading to a conclusion. So the solution to that is incorporating buts and therefores and just making twists and turns in the story. So that's too much messaging. The third one, I would say, is an interesting one called I call it story washing.
What's that?
which also has to do with the message, but in a different way. So this is where you practice storytelling right, but you fail to make it connect to the message. So there's a lot of commercials, for instance, that do this. They tell a beautiful story, and then it's like, boom, a logo is on there. I think one of the most famous one is a Renault commercial for the car brand, right? They had the Renault Clio, I think it is, and they tell it's an ad, 2 minutes, it's beautiful. They tell a story about a exchange student, a little girl that goes on exchange in France, a British girl, and they become best friends. They're like pen pals, and they stay friends, and then they meet each other again. They're in their sort of late teens. They actually fall in love. Now, the girl goes back home to her parents, and the parents find out, and they're very conservative apparently, so they get angry at her, and then to make it even worse, like fast forward to a couple of years later, the girl is the French girl has now married to a man, so apparently, and so she's heartbroken all around, and then lo and behold, she gets a call, or like the doorbell rings a couple of years later. It's raining, it's pouring rain, and the French woman now is standing in front of her door, and obviously the marriage ended, and they hug and kiss, and they're happy. They live happily ever after, basically. And then also the father, like the last shot is a sunny sort of driveway where they pull up in their new Renault Clio, which they've been driving Renault Clios all throughout the film, of course, which is fine. And then and then the dad is, then they have children, and then the dad is now a grandfather, and everybody's happy, right? It's, the way I'm telling it is a little flat, of course, but it's really, you should look it up. It's a beautiful story, Renault. But then they end Renault Clio, 30 years in the making. Renault, passion for driving, or whatever, something like that. Which has no connection to that story whatsoever. And it just completely kills it. So if you're telling a story for a purpose, to bring across an idea or whatnot, not just to entertain, which, in a business context is usually why you tell stories, right? It's not, you're not just there to entertain like comedians are, for instance. You need to make really sure that your message is tied to your story. And the way that we do that is that, we start with the message, of course, because that's the briefing. And then we need to make the most difficult step is to find like a core human value that sort of is you can find between the lines of the message, right? If the story is about sustainability, that's the theme. But maybe the story is actually about family, right? Or like in the 30 Harvest film I mentioned that we made. The message is about farmers becoming more sustainable, but the human value is about not so much protecting the world protecting the land for the world, but just protecting the future of your daughter, of your family. So that's a human value, and once you found the human value within your intellectual message or your corporate message, then it becomes quite easy, because then if it's about protecting your family, then the story should actually start at the opposite end of that, right? So if the human value is safety and protection, then the story is about the opposite, which might be failure or danger, or if you want to tell a story that says something about togetherness, for instance, right? If your message, like the human value between the lines is togetherness, then the story is not about togetherness, it's about loneliness or separation or isolation. That was 3. There's a 4th one, the last one of the major mistakes, and that's not doing your proper research. So stories are not made up, they are found. They already exist, and they just need to be found, whether that's in your own life or in the world at large. If you don't do proper research, meaning if you don't spend your thorough time trying to understand the world and understand life and analyze in the way that I said, like, what's the dark night of the soul? What was the doubt what caused the doubt? Which decision did I make, or did the protagonist make to start doubting at some point? What was the goal that they were trying to achieve, but what did they really need in between that? Right, that exercise, that's research. That's trying to make sense of life. And that's why if you apply it to yourself, it's therapeutic, potentially, because you're trying to make sense of your own life. But in general, if you want to be a good storyteller, you should adopt that vision or that sort of lens to look through at the world. And I think, so back to your question of what is my tips for starting storytellers. There's no one hack, as you I might have concluded. I don't believe that. I believe it's a craft. So you need to put in the work. And these 4 elements, so the bragging, negaphobia, the messaging, meaning taking the turning points, the story washing, making sure you connect your message to your story, and then the research, the understanding life. That's what you need to sort of train yourself to do anytime you set out to tell a story.
Wonderful. On this path, you mentioned Save the Cat as one book that you loved.
Yeah.
What book would you recommend anyone who wants to become a better storyteller?
Well, there's really 3 books. Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, definitely worth reading. Robert McKee is obviously the second one. He has his book Story, his big, seminal work is called Story, which everyone, is basically his storytelling workshop, his 4-day workshop in a book. And that workshop, like everyone from Tom Cruise to Steven Spielberg took that workshop in Hollywood. So it's the real deal. Like the film adaptation with Nicolas Cage is specifically about Robert McKee and his workshop, and then the protagonist is a budding young writer who's just completely out of it. And it's a funny film. It's an old film. But actually, he also wrote a book about storytelling applied to business, which might be more accessible and more applicable to most of your viewers. Fun fact, that one film that we made in 2014, DSM film, a corporate film for DSM called The Unsung Heroes of Science, is mentioned in that book on page 144
Gotta check it out.
as a good example of a corporate film that triggers emotions.
Beautiful.
So Storynomics it's called, that book. And obviously I've been promoting that book ever since it came out, and I found out that he actually uses one of our films. And then the third book is your book, man. It's a good book. People should read your book.
I agree.
What's it called again? Storytelling for Business. Philipp Humm. Check
That's
it out.
Check it out.
So that would be my book advice for sure.
Beautiful. Jasper, if there's one last tip that you can give to any aspiring storyteller, what would it be?
Well, we haven't talked about Kamamuta yet. Yeah. Hey.
What's Kamamuta?
Yeah, well, glad you asked. Kamamuta has nothing to do with what you're thinking of right now. It's a term from Sanskrit, which means being moved by love. And it's actually a scientific term. So it was first coined in cultural anthropology, but it was later adopted by social psychologists. And it's an emotion. It describes an emotion. And it's, you've never heard of the term, but you felt the emotion for sure many times in your life, because it's this emotion where, you suddenly feel like a rush of goosebumps or like tears in your eyes even, or like a warm feeling in your chest, or like shivers kind of. It's an emotion you felt. And you felt it at, certain specific moments, perhaps. Like, for instance, if you're at I don't know if you like football. You probably do. If you're at a football game and there's like a wave being done in the stadium, or obviously if someone scores, or if it's a big win with a lot at stake, you feel this rush, right? These sort of goosebumps. Or if you're at a concert or like a dance festival, whatever, and then the beat drops, right? You get the shivers. You feel this, right? You almost if you think about it, you kind of feel it. Or maybe if you see like really cute animals, there are specific moments. but also if you watch or read or hear certain stories. Because the awesome thing about this is you get to experience it in the third person, Kamamuta. And why is it so relevant? Because of what it does to you. Because it's been shown to make people feel connected. And it's been shown also that people feel the urge to share whatever gave them that feeling. Right, that's kind of at the core of why social media is successful, right? I mean, there's a lot of psychology behind that, but this is at least a sort of an optimistic, positive thing that's about that, because people want to share beautiful moments, and that's because these moments give them Kamamuta, and Kamamuta propels them to share. So it touches upon the sort of the core existential reason for being of, stories, because they bond communities, they bond groups, they bring people together and make them feel connected to each other, which, I already said, like I'm an optimist at heart, and I believe in the beauty of human nature, but I think this is worthwhile, right? And so what's great about it is that you can provoke these feelings through storytelling, because you get to experience them in the third person. And it's been researched that specifically stories that are in some way about a reunion, so people who are pulled apart in time or place or whatever, that reunite, or stories that are about redemption, so a wrong that's being made right, are specifically stories that very much, have a potential to trigger Kamamuta. So Kamamuta is defined as the sudden intensification of a feeling of connectedness. So if there's in your story a sudden moment, doesn't need to be unexpected even, but suddenly, like suddenly a goal is being scored, or suddenly someone sees a long-lost lover or whatnot, that gives you that feeling, and that makes you feel connected to each other, to the people in the story. Ever since I've heard about this and started studying it, I realized, coming back to the first point I made in the beginning of why I wanted to, make more like storytelling type films, it is because I realized, like, I'm not gonna solve climate change, or I'm not gonna bring peace to the world, or I'm not even gonna bring innovations to the world, or whatever. But what I get to do with my craft is make people feel Kamamuta every once in a while. And it's it doesn't last long, the feeling, but, it can have a lasting impact on what you think about something, or what you do, or what your perspective is on a certain position. And I think if I succeed in creating Kamamuta moments for viewers, that's something I'd be really proud of when I'm, at retirement age, looking back, what the hell did I do with my time? Like, well, I give people Kamamuta. So my, I guess, final tip would be read up on Kamamuta. If you're like me, at least. So maybe I'm crossing out half of your viewership who are more pessimistic and cynical, and they need to become comedians. I have nothing for you, I'm sorry. But for the other half who believes in the good in people and, wants to see people thrive regardless of, or notwithstanding, their trials and tribulations in life, then read up on Kamamuta and strive for it, because it's worthwhile.
Beautiful. Jasper, thank you so much. It has been an honor. Thanks for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation. I enjoyed it. Thanks.